I grew up believing my mother was a criminal, raised by the woman who swore she saw her commit murder. But 2 decades later, the truth came out, and all hell broke loose. In this true and emotional story, you will follow my journey as a daughter in search of justice, truth, and forgiveness. Get ready for an intense story, full of suspense, twists, and breathtaking revelations. Is there still time to repair a 20-year-old mistake? Comment. Would you forgive someone who destroyed your family? Subscribe for more stories that will touch your soul. I grew up believing my mother was a criminal. My father never talked about her. All I knew came from neighborhood whispers, from the sidelong glances from mothers at school, from the hushed whispers as I passed in the hallway. That one over there, the murderer's daughter. I never knew exactly what she had done. All I was told was that she was dangerous, that she was where she belonged. But the strange thing was, even then, I never felt angry with her. I missed her, even though I had never really known her. It was like something inside me was screaming that the story was wrong. I was raised by Mrs. Elza, a strict, organized lady with an austere air. She said she was a friend of my father, and that she had offered to take care of me when everything happened. We lived in a clean, quiet house, where every piece of furniture seemed to have its exact place, and any step out of rhythm was disturbing. She was not affectionate. She did the basics, but with a coldness that chilled even the hottest summer. In the dining room, there was a huge painting, a hand-painted portrait of a woman with her back turned in a wheat field. I always thought it was strange. When I was 7 years old, I asked her who she was. Mrs. Elza simply said, "Someone who chose the wrong path," and she never spoke of it again. When I was 12, I started asking my father questions. He didn't live with us, but he visited me from time to time. He was a tired, soft-spoken man who trembled every time I asked him about my mother. One day, he looked me in the eye and said, "Your mother did what she had to do, but no one would listen." That stuck in my head for years. When I was 17, I discovered a locked closet in the guest room. It was a place where Mrs. Elza said she kept old things. But that afternoon, she had left the key in the door. I let myself in. What I found inside changed everything. There were boxes and boxes of newspaper clippings, all with the same headline: "Woman arrested after brutal daycare murder." The black and white photo showed a woman in handcuffs, her eyes downcast, a weary expression on her face. Even though I was very young at the time of the arrest, I recognized that face. It was the same one I had seen in my dreams since I was a child. My mother. The clippings told the story of a daycare director who had been accused of poisoning a child. The victim's mother, outraged, made a scene at the time, demanding justice. The newspapers described my mother as cold, manipulative, dangerous. They said she had lost her mind, that it was all part of a dark plan. But nothing there made sense. The texts were full of contradictions. Some witnesses said she cried a lot. Others said she screamed that she was innocent. No newspaper gave the exact reason for the crime. At the back of the closet, I found something even more disturbing. A note, handwritten. It read, "I just wanted to protect you. Forgive me." The handwriting was shaky, desperate, and on the back of the paper, a fingerprint, dried blood. I took the note with me and hid it under my mattress. It was mine. It was the only proof I had that my mother might have been the victim of something. At 19, I entered law school. Perhaps subconsciously, I wanted justice. I started researching old cases. I asked for access to my mother's case. It took months, but I got it. When the manila envelope arrived, my heart almost jumped out of my chest. I opened it with shaking hands. The first page of the investigation had the name of the prosecution's main witness, the one who had said she saw my mother put something in the child's juice. Elza Vieira de Aguiar. My blood ran cold. It was her, the woman who raised me, the one who told me every day how grateful I should be, the one who fed me, clothed me, gave me a roof over my head, the same woman who put my mother in prison. That day, I couldn't go home. I sat on the sidewalk outside my college and cried like a child. Everything seemed like a lie. Everything seemed like a farce. Why would she do this? What was behind that accusation? The following week, I applied to intern at the public defender's office that handled criminal review cases. I had to understand what it took to reopen a case like my mother's. I learned about evidence, about new witnesses, about procedural inconsistencies. And the more I read the case, the more holes I found. Nothing was solid. Everything seemed to have been done in a hurry. The prosecution ignored the testimony of employees who defended my mother. No conclusive toxicology report was presented. Only the testimony of Mrs. Elza. That's when I made the decision. I needed to confront her, find out the truth, look her in the eyes and ask her what really happened that day. That night, I came home with my heart racing. I found Mrs. Elza sitting in the armchair, as usual, watching the news. She looked at me, smiled slightly and said, "It's time, isn't it?" I froze. She knew. "It's time, isn't it?" Those words cut me like a razor. She didn't ask what I knew. She didn't feign surprise. She simply spoke as if she had been waiting for this since the day she had mistakenly put the key to that cabinet in the door. I sat down on the couch across from her. My hands were sweating cold. I didn't know where to start. My throat was tight. But she calmly picked up the remote, turned off the TV, and turned to me, folding her hands in her lap. "Have you read the lawsuit?" she asked. I nodded. "And found my name." I nodded again. And then, for the first time, my voice came out. "Why?" She took a deep breath. She closed her eyes, and she said, "Because she was going to tell." "Tell me what?" I asked, my voice already cracking. That I wasn't just a witness, that I was an accomplice, that what happened to that child wasn't what they said, and that the real reason was dirtier than you can imagine. My head was spinning. My stomach was churning. I jumped up. "Did you kill that child?" She shook her head firmly. "No, but I allowed it." Silence filled the room like a living presence. My chest burned. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to run away. But I couldn't. I was trapped in that chair, in that house, in that story. She stood up, walked slowly to the bookshelf, pulled out an old book, and took out a faded photograph. She held it out to me. It was a child, a little boy smiling, hugging a young woman with eyes very similar to mine. "His name was Daniel," she said. "He was my grandson." I was confused. "What do you mean, your grandson?" She sighed. "My son had a relationship with a woman who died of an overdose. He didn't want the boy. I raised him, alone. I did everything for him. But Daniel was allergic, extremely allergic. One day, he had a severe reaction at daycare. The food wasn't meant for him, but he ate it. And he died." I felt a chill run up my spine. "And you blamed my mother?" I whispered, horrified. She nodded. "Because she wanted to report the neglect. She wanted to file a lawsuit against the city, against the management, against me. She said she couldn't let that happen again. But if she spoke out, I would lose everything. My pension, my grandson's custody, even if he was dead, my name in the city. So I said what was necessary. A lie? Yes, but a lie that saved me." I started to shake. Tears flowed uncontrollably. "And that's why you raised her daughter?" "Because I owed her that," he replied. "Because somehow I knew I had taken your life, and I thought taking care of you would be a way to balance it out. But time passed, and I forgot what was right. The pain in my chest was physical. It was like my heart had split in two. Everything I had lived was based on a lie. My childhood, my silences, my absence from my mother, every birthday, every time I dreamed of her face, begging for help. "Is she still alive?" I asked, breathless. She hesitated. "She is. In a state prison, under closed regime. No one has ever wanted to hear her side of the story." I didn't wait any longer. I went upstairs, grabbed a backpack, and left. I didn't look back. I didn't say anything. I left that night like someone leaving a fire. Burned, yes, but alive. And the next day, I went to the prison. I went through the bureaucracy, the searches, the curious looks of the guards. When they called my name and said that inmate Maria Clara Ferreira had agreed to see me, my body froze. I could barely walk to the visiting room. When the door opened, I saw her. She was older than in the pictures. Gray hair, haggard face, but her eyes were exactly like mine. She stopped walking as soon as she saw me. She stared at me, as if she couldn't believe it. And then, in a trembling whisper, she said, You are my daughter?" I nodded, swallowing back tears. She fell to her knees. "I'm sorry. God, forgive me. Forgive me for not being able to protect you." I knelt down too, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt the warmth of an embrace that was rightfully mine. A mother's hug. We stayed there for minutes that seemed like an eternity, crying, sobbing, speechless. Everything that life took from us, that moment gave back with full force. And that's when I made my decision. I was going to reopen the case and clear my mother's name, if it was the last thing I did. I went home that night without knowing exactly where to go. Dona Elza's house now seemed cursed. Every piece of furniture, every wall, every photograph in the hallway screamed lies. I stayed in a simple hotel near the city courthouse. I stayed up all night, studying my mother's case file line by line, going up every detail, every name, every gap that could be exploited. The next morning, I went straight to the public defender's office where I was interning. I knocked on Dr. Mauricio's door with my eyes swollen from crying so much, and he realized that something was serious. "Doctor, I need to reopen a case. It's my mother's. She's been in prison for 20 years for a crime she didn't commit." He closed the laptop slowly and looked at me. "Do you have proof?" "I have enough to start with," I replied, taking the note with dried blood from my backpack. The name of Mrs. Elza as the only witness, the absence of concrete expertise, the testimonies ignored. And above all, now I had her own confession. "Did you record it?" I swallowed hard. "No, but she told me, and I can make her repeat it if necessary." He took a deep breath. "If she denies it later, that's no good. But we can work with this. We need to turn suspicions into evidence. We'll file a criminal review petition. It'll be difficult, but not impossible." And so my war began. I spent days and nights immersed in documents, visiting former employees of the daycare center, now retired or living in other cities. I met one of them, Dona Iria, who greeted me with teary eyes as soon as she heard my surname. "Are you Clara's daughter?" she asked, excited. She was a wonderful woman. She took care of those children as if they were her own. That story always seemed wrong to me. I showed the note to Mrs. Iria. She recognized the handwriting. It's definitely hers. She used to write us letters at the end of the year, always in that handwriting. Clara was transparent and sincere, and Elza, well, Elza never accepted what happened to her grandson, and she hated her mother for trying to point out the mistakes of the administration. The city supported Elza because they were afraid of scandal. It was all a dirty game. I recorded the testimony. Legally, it might not be enough on its own, but it was another piece in this filthy puzzle. Each time a witness confirmed my mother's character, the more I felt I was on the right track. I went back to the prison and told her everything. For the first time, I saw hope in Maria Clara's eyes. "I thought I was going to die here, thinking you hated me." "No, Mom. I just didn't know." "They told me everything wrong. They hid everything from me." She held my hands, her eyes brimming with tears. "You are strong, much stronger than I ever imagined, and you will do it." And the trial was initiated based on new evidence, testimonies, and the procedural flaws evident in the previous trial. The judge agreed to review the request. It was months of waiting. Months in which I lived off coffee, certified copies, and constant trips to the prison, where my mother and I finally built a relationship. She told me about her childhood, about how I liked to sleep with my head resting on her heart, about the songs she sang to calm me down. And I, listening to that, cried silently for all the years that had been stolen from us. At the same time, I filed a formal complaint against Mrs. Elza, now elderly, for false testimony. She denied everything when subpoenaed. She said she never said anything like that I was making it up, that my mother was, in fact, guilty, that I had been manipulated by her. But the recordings I made with witnesses, The note, old records, and even inconsistencies in Elza's own statements over the years were used to show that there was a pattern of contradictions. With that, the judge authorized a new hearing to reevaluate the case. It was scheduled for a cloudy Friday. The city seemed to breathe expectantly. Journalists showed up. Former nursery school colleagues were called to testify again, and Maria Clara, for the first time in 20 years, was brought back to the courthouse where it all began. She came in handcuffed, but with her head held high. When we locked eyes, she smiled. Not a smile of victory, but of relief, as if to say, "No matter what happens, I am at peace with being heard." The session was long. Hours of exposing facts, arguments, and tough questions. The prosecution tried to defend the original case, but they were not firm. Each new fact undermined a piece of the old accusation. When Mrs. Iria was called, her speech was a punch in the stomach for the prosecution. Clara was innocent. She was used as a scapegoat. And Elza lied. We all knew. But we were afraid. And then, the final bombshell. We gave the judge a recording I had made a few days earlier, when I confronted Mrs. Elza in her home with a hidden microphone. She said through tears, "Yes, I lied. I did what I had to do. May God forgive me." The silence in the court was absolute. The judge called a recess. But during that break, my mother and I were placed in separate rooms. I sat on the steps outside the courthouse and cried. Not out of sadness, but out of fear. Fear that despite everything, justice would be deaf again. And when we finally returned to the courtroom, the judge read the decision. In view of the new evidence presented, the testimonies collected, and the inconsistencies in the original proceedings, this court decides to acquit the defendant, Maria Clara Ferreira, declaring her innocence and ordering her immediate release. The room erupted in murmurs. I collapsed to the floor, crying like a child. My mother, now uncuffed, slowly stood up and held out her hand. She walked over to me and hugged me. And in that embrace, there was no more guilt. There was no more silence. There was justice. But something still haunted me. A question I didn't want to ask, but had to. Why didn't my father ever try to save her? That same night, I decided to confront him. And what he revealed to me was more devastating than any lie I had ever been told. I went back to the hotel that night with my mother. She had left prison with a tired body and a wounded soul, but her eyes were shining as if they had learned to see again. I asked for an extra room for her. She refused. She said she wanted to sleep next to me just once, just that night, just to feel that she was alive. We lay in the same bed, like mother and daughter, as if time had brought us back to the point where everything stopped. She fell asleep with her hand clasped in mine, as if she was afraid of losing me again. But I didn't sleep. My mind was on fire, going over every detail, every name, every expression, and most of all, every absence. And among them all, there was one that screamed, "My father." He knew. He knew my mother was innocent. He knew the woman who raised me was the same one who put her behind bars. And he never did anything, never said anything. He just let her go. The next day, my eyes still scarred from the previous night's vigil, I went to his house. It was an old, moldy 2-story house on a quiet street in the neighborhood where I spent much of my childhood. I knocked on the door as if knocking on a door that had been locked from the inside for many years. He opened it himself. He was older, stooped, duller. He looked me in the eye and seemed to know what was coming. He didn't say anything. He just stepped aside and let me in. We sat at the kitchen table. The kettle was making noise on the stove, but the silence between us was deafening. "She's free," I said. He nodded, looking at his hand on the table. "You knew. You always knew." His voice cracked. "Yes. Then why didn't you do anything?" He closed his eyes tightly, as if trying to escape a burning thought. "Because I was weak. Because when Elza came to me with that story, saying that her mother had gone crazy, and that the whole town was against her, I didn't know how to act. You abandoned her, and you abandoned me with the woman who destroyed her. I thought I was protecting you, Protecting from who? My mother? Or the truth? He began to cry. A silent, dry cry of a man who spent decades trying to pretend he felt nothing. She asked me for help. In jail. She wrote me a letter, begging me to find witnesses, to prove she was innocent. But I was afraid. Afraid of losing what little I had left. Afraid of facing it all again. I let time pass, waiting for someone, someday, to do what I should have done. That someone was me, I whispered. Her daughter. The daughter you left to be raised by a woman who betrayed you. He looked at me in pain. And I am the most guilty of all. I stood up. I didn't say anything else. Not because I wanted to punish him with silence, but because at that moment, words weren't enough, and I knew he would have to live with this every day he had left. In the days that followed, my mother began the process of social reintegration. It wasn't easy. She had no documents, no bank account, and didn't even have a valid ID. It was as if the system, upon releasing her, had simply forgotten that she was a person. But I was there, in every line, at every signature, at every step. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she smiled, sometimes she just stared at the sky, as if trying to get used to the light outside. One day, walking through the city center, we stopped in front of an old daycare center. She stood still, staring at the building, the toys in the yard, the children's voices. "This is where it all began," she whispered. "This is where it all began." We were silent. And there, in the middle of the street, she told me something she hadn't revealed yet. I saw Elsa changing the trays. I knew that the juice wasn't what was on the list. When Daniel started to feel sick, I tried to help him, but it was too late. When I suggested calling the health department, she threatened me. She said that if I told anyone, she would end my life. "And yet you spoke," she nodded. "Because I was a mother, and I thought the truth would be enough. But the truth was not enough. Until now." Months passed. I got a paid internship at the public prosecutor's office. I graduated. And on graduation day, when I was called to the stage, my mother was in the audience, standing, applauding, crying, and for the first time in a long time, smiling without fear. After the ceremony, she handed me an envelope. It was small and yellowed. Inside was a letter. The letter she had written the day she was arrested. Never delivered. "If my daughter grows up hating me, I will understand. But if one day she discovers the truth, I hope she finds within herself the courage that I did not have. And that, even if it is late, justice will once again stand on its own 2 feet." I kept that letter like a lucky charm. And that same day, I announced that I would pursue a master's degree in criminal law. Not out of vanity, but because my story, our story, was not over yet. And I wanted to make sure that no other mother, no other daughter, would have to go through that again. But fate does not forgive those who mess with the past. And shortly after, a new anonymous complaint reached me. Something involving the daycare. Something buried for over 20 years. And this time, the truth would be even crueler. The complaint arrived on a normal afternoon, amidst paperwork and deadlines. An envelope with no return address was left at the reception of the prosecutor's office where I worked. The paper inside was yellowed, with letters cut out of magazines like in old movies. But the content was straightforward. It wasn't just Daniel. Go to the old east wing of the daycare. The evidence is still there. A silent witness. At first, I thought it was a prank. Or worse, an attempt to reopen wounds that had barely begun to heal. But something about it, the tone of the note, the choice of words, the date printed in the corner of the paper, told me there was truth to it. The envelope had not been left there by chance. That night, I couldn't sleep. I spent hours reviewing old photos of the daycare, diagrams I found in the trial, reports on the structure. The East Wing. Yes, it existed. But during my mother's trial, that part of the building had already been deactivated. They said it had been closed off due to leaks and mold. No additional details were included. No recent inspection. No technical report. I decided I needed to go there. I invited my mother to go with me. She hesitated, afraid, but after everything she had been through, fear was no longer enough to stop her. We put on masks and gloves, as recommended by the protocols for entering abandoned places, and we went together, on a Saturday morning, to the old building that housed the daycare. The rusty gate still creaked open. Tall grass covered part of the courtyard, but the structure remained standing. The main hall was filled with cobwebs, dust, and the strong smell of a forgotten past. My mother walked as if she were waking through a nightmare. Every step seemed to hurt. "It's this way," she said, pointing to a side hallway blocked by makeshift wood. We broke in with an iron bar we had brought with us. The hallway was dark. The floor was unstable. The ceiling leaked, despite the sun outside. We came to a small room with closet doors in the corner. An old storage room. Inside, stacked under moldy plastic, were boxes. Some held toys, others moldy children's books. But in one of them, we found something that froze the air between us. Medical records, emergency reports, all dated the same week as Daniel's death, except the names were different. Another name, another child, another death. It read on a nearly illegible file. Patient, Nathan Nascimento, 5 years old, sudden respiratory crisis. Taken to hospital, died hours later. Food ingested. Juice with color change reported by kitchen employee. My mother sat on the floor, trembling. I didn't know. I had no idea. They told me he had died at home, that he was in another class. The following pages showed that the case had been covered up. Nathan had allegedly had a history of allergies, but there was no toxicology report. The hospital report had the same signature as Daniel's report, and a handwritten note in the corner of Nathan's file made me freeze. Do not mention in the final report. Management requested absolute confidentiality. We took the documents with us. I scanned everything. I kept copies in 2 places. And the next day, I anonymously reported it to the public prosecutor's office as a new fact of public interest and potential violation of human rights. The investigation was reopened. And this time, it wasn't about my mother anymore. It was about a whole structure of negligence and cover-up that could have involved the city hall, doctors, directors, and maybe more victims. But while this was happening, something strange began to happen. I received an envelope at home. No sender. Inside, just a photo. It was my mother, still young, hugging a man I didn't know. On the back, a handwritten sentence. "She lied to you too. He's the real father." I was in shock. I looked at the photo again. The man's eyes, the crooked smile. Something in me recognized it, as if my blood knew. On the same day, my mother disappeared. Her chair was still pushed back. Her glass of water was half empty. Her reading glasses were on top of the newspaper. Everything indicated that my mother had left for a short time, perhaps to breathe, to walk. But she had not returned. I waited 1, 2, 5 hours. I called her cell phone, voicemail. I called hospitals, the police, old contacts at the public defender's office. Nothing. No news. No sign. It was as if she had vanished. But the envelope, that photo, it couldn't be a coincidence. I looked at her again. The landscape in the background was familiar. A square that no longer existed, demolished decades ago to make way for a parking lot. But the man next to her, he was young, with something in his eyes that reminded me of mine. More than any trace of my adoptive father. I saved the image and went back to my old college notebook, where I wrote down names from the case. There was one name that appeared as the former director of an NGO that provided food to daycare centers in the region, Rubens Godoy. But the name disappeared after 2003, the same year Daniel died, and my mother was arrested. I searched. It took me hours, searching through databases, until I found it. An address, a small farm in the countryside, where Rubens' name appeared as the owner of a farm that, curiously, was also registered as a supplier of organic juices to public schools until the 2000s. I got in the car that very morning. I drove alone, with the photograph on the passenger seat and my heart pounding in my chest. It was as if I were heading toward the past, with the headlights cutting through the darkness of truth. I arrived at the place before sunrise. The wooden gate was down, but there were still old signs with the name Estancia Santa Marisa hanging there. The place looked abandoned, but not forgotten. The grass was cut. There were fresh footprints in the mud at the entrance. I moved forward slowly. I reached a porch covered in vines. I knocked loudly on the door. No one answered. But before I could knock again, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around abruptly, and there he was. Gray hair, worn flannel shirt, cane in hand, and eyes. Eyes just like mine. He looked at me like he'd been waiting for this moment for years. "You're Clara's daughter, aren't you?" I nodded, feeling a lump tighten in my throat. She was here. When? Today. The ground seemed to give way beneath my feet. "Where is she? What happened?" He took a deep breath, looked up at the orange dawn sky, and said, "She found out the truth, and she left before I could explain it all." "What truth?" I shouted, unable to contain my despair any longer. He walked over to a rocking chair, sat down with difficulty, and pointed to an old photo album on the table. "Your mother and I were more than colleagues, more than lovers. She thought your father was someone else. But the truth is, I am your biological father. She pushed me away when she found out about the contracts I had with the city. I was untrustworthy. She knew it. I tried to protect her, but I made bad choices. And when everything fell apart, I ran. I hid. You let her get arrested." I spat, my hands shaking. "You abandoned her like everyone else." He looked into my eyes. "Yes, and I regret it every day. But now someone is after her. Someone who doesn't want things from the past to come to light. Who? I don't know. But she was scared. She got another note. Someone knew she was free, and they knew she would remember what happened to Natan." My blood ran cold. The forgotten child, the hidden death, the forbidden second name. If she disappeared because of that, then it wasn't of her own free will. He shook his head slowly. "You need to find the name that's not on the record, the one everyone avoided mentioning, the only witness who saw what happened in the nursery kitchen. She was a 9-year-old girl, the cook's daughter. She saw everything, but she disappeared soon after. No one has heard from her since. And her name? She was called Bruna Costa." I wrote it down in a hurry. I grabbed my cell phone and started frantic searches, but nothing appeared. No CPF, no school records, no social networks. It was as if Bruna had been erased from history. But if she were alive, she was the missing key, the only person capable of confirming what happened that tragic morning, of proving, once and for all, that it wasn't my mother. That prison was the least of her punishments. I got back in the car, my heart pounding. I called every source who still owed me favors. I scoured private databases, until a lead turned up. A nurse by that name, working at a psychiatric hospital in the countryside. The same hospital where, coincidentally, her mother had died years before. The former cook. It was her. I hit the road right away. But before I left town, I got a call. Unknown number. I answered with my voice stuck in my throat. On the other side, a low, hoarse male voice said, "If you keep digging, you'll find a body. Hers, and yours soon after." The call dropped. I drove to the hospital with my hands sweating on the steering wheel and my phone turned off. Out of instinct, fear, or pure protection. The man's voice echoed in my head like a nail driven into a bone. "If you keep digging, you'll find a body. Hers, and yours soon after." But now it was too late to back out. The psychiatric hospital was set back from the city, surrounded by tall eucalyptus trees and chain-link fences. A rusty gate creaked as it opened. The pale sign read, Santa Lucia Institute, with missing letters. I went inside. The reception area was clean but too quiet. There was a main hallway and several doors to the left. Nurses walked slowly, as if time had changed. Everything smelled of disinfectant, loneliness, and oblivion. I showed a fake document. I said I was looking for a nurse for a humanitarian legal project. The name? Bruna Costa. The attendant hesitated. Bruna left a short time ago. She asked for leave, for personal reasons. Did she leave any contact details? No, just an envelope. She said if anyone came asking for her, to give them this. My heart almost stopped. I took the envelope with trembling hands. Outside, I sat on the concrete bench beneath a cypress tree. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with shaky, almost childlike handwriting, but direct, short, surgical. I saw Elsa switch the glasses, and I saw a man in a gray suit take the medical report before the doctor signed it. He saw me, and they sent me away with my mother 2 days later. She died of a heart attack the following week. At the bottom of the page, an address written in pen: Rua das Acacias, 238, apartment 301, block B, Jardim União. And below, only tell the truth if you are ready for the consequences. I never was. And I drove to the indicated neighborhood. A peripheral area, old buildings, cracked stairs, and chained gates. I went up to the 3rd floor. I knocked on door 301. No one answered. I waited. I knocked again. Nothing. I climbed down the outside, climbed up a section of the building's rusty pipe, crazy, I know, and looked out the kitchen window. I saw dirty dishes, a light on, a mug lying on the floor. Something was wrong. I ran back. I called the building manager. He said he was from the prosecutor's office and there was a risk to his life. He opened it. The apartment was empty, but not clean. Empty of movement. There were signs that someone had left in a hurry. The bedroom door was ajar. Inside, a torn photo lay on the bed. I picked it up. It was my mother. Young, holding a child that wasn't me. Beside, Bruna. On the back of the photo, written in pencil. She knew. And Elsa too. Before I could think, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Strong, decisive. I turned off the light. I hid behind the door. 2 men came in. One was wearing gloves. The other was carrying a black bag. "She's not here," said one. "Then get out. Take everything on paper and set it on fire afterwards." I waited until they left. I managed to escape through the laundry room window to the lower floor, where a lady helped me without knowing who I was, perhaps because of the terror on my face. I went back to the car, with the torn photo in my pocket and the certainty that now, everything had gone beyond the scope of justice. Someone big was involved. Someone who had been moving the pieces from the beginning. It wasn't just Elsa. She was part of something bigger, an obedient puppet, a puppet of an invisible network. I called Rubens, the man who said he was my biological father. "She's gone again," I said. "I know," he replied. "I got a letter from Bruna. She gave it to me before she disappeared. She said her mother found out who the man in the gray suit was. And he was someone with high ties to the health department at the time. He falsified medical reports in exchange for inflated contracts with school supply companies. The juice that killed Daniel, and perhaps Natan, was expired. But they needed to get rid of whoever knew. His mother knew. And Elsa, to protect what was left of her grandson's reputation and her own, gave in to the pressure. "What now?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Now. You need to find your mother before they do to her what they did to Bruna." "What?" I got a call. They said if I spoke, I would be next. And what's more, they left a warning. What warning? A package, with your mother's ring, and blood. My vision went black. My legs felt weak. I sat on the sidewalk, unable to breathe. They had my mother, and they were leaving traces on purpose. For me to see, for me to warn, for me to torture. But they weren't going to stop me. It was too late to give up, and too early to cry. I picked up the torn photo, Bruna's note, my mother's letter. All of that was now more than evidence. It was a battle cry. The truth had to come out, even if it was with the last breath. And I already knew where to look. In the health department's archives, where old contracts are buried, never to be seen again. If I wanted names, evidence, faces, they were there. And if my mother was still alive, That's where they would keep her hidden until they decided the end of the story. But I was writing my own now, even if it was with blood. It was dawn when I parked in front of the building of the old municipal health department. The building was immense, forgotten by time, with windows sealed by bars and archives kept in basements where mold and silence reigned. But I had the name of an old employee, a man who had been in charge of the archives. I spent days investigating. I discovered that he was still working as a night security guard, as a sort of favor from the city for services rendered. His name, Orlando C. Muniz. Retired, but with access. I waited for him at the back gate. When he appeared, with slow steps and a suspicious look, I showed him a copy of the torn photo. I didn't have to say much. "I remember her," he said, looking at the portrait. "She was one of the only ones who had the courage to enter this place with a complaint in her hands. And now she's gone. If you can help me, Orlando, you could save a life." He looked at me for long seconds. Then he nodded. "Come." "But you didn't see anything, you understand?" We went down a side staircase. The lights flickered. The smell was strong. Stacks of cardboard boxes with faded labels covered the walls. Orlando took a set of keys from his belt and opened a metal door at the back. Inside was an old iron cabinet. These are the supply contracts from that time. Some have been digitized. Others have mysteriously disappeared. I rummaged through everything for hours. My hands were shaking. My eyes were burning. Until I found it. A document dated 3 days before Daniel's death. An internal report with a note of an expired batch. Name of the supplier company, Agrovida Distribuidora Ltda. Signature authorizing receipt, even with an expired date. Rubens Godoy. My chest tightened. Rubens. My biological father. The same man who said he regretted it. He signed it. He knew it. I ran back home. I called him. I asked him to come to me immediately. He appeared 2 hours later, his face drawn. "You knew," I said, handing over the contract. He looked down. "I didn't know that batch was expired. Only later, when Clara showed it to me, I tried to contain the scandal. I was pressured. I was threatened. You had the chance to prevent her arrest. And I failed. I was not an accomplice. But I was a coward. You still are. Where is she?" He stared at me. His breath hitched. "They took her to a disused shelter, used by the city in the 90s. There is no record there. It is off the map. I tried to go after her, but they said that if I set foot there, I would never leave. Then take me there." And 2 hours later, in a rural area dotted with abandoned warehouses, Rubens led me between dirt trails and corroded structures. The old shelter was surrounded by barbed wire, but there was no visible movement. A dog barked in the distance. The sky was heavy. The tension in the air was almost electric. We forced our way in through an open side door. We passed through dark hallways, rooms with old mattresses and broken cabinets. And then, we heard a muffled sound, a moan, a suppressed cry. I followed the sound to a chained door. "Clara!" I shouted. Silence. "It's me, your daughter." On the other side, a noise. Chain moving. Fragile footsteps. "Marina?" she whispered in a low voice. "Yes, Mom. I'm here." I broke it open with an iron bar that Rubens found. The door gave way, and there she was. Weak. Pale. With a cut on her face and sunken eyes. But alive. I ran to her. I hugged her. I cried. She held me as if she were saving her own soul. "They brought me here when they found out you were getting too close. They said they were going to make it look like a suicide, like they did with the cook, like they tried with Bruna. But it's over now, Mom. I have everything. The contracts, the names, the audios, even the location of this place." And at that moment, we heard the sound of the gate slamming in the distance. They knew. Rubens picked up his cell phone and dialed. I called the police before we came. I said it was a kidnapping. They're coming. Within minutes, police cars arrived. Sirens wailed through the night. Armed men invaded the area. And amidst the dust, mud, and smell of dirty history, I saw my mother being taken out on a stretcher, alive, for the first time in 2 decades, as a recognized victim. Why? The mining the media exploded. The scandal took over the newspapers. The names of politicians, businessmen, doctors, and public administrators were revealed. It was a national scandal. The NGO Agrovita was dissolved. The investigation went on for months. My mother received compensation from the state, but money can't buy back time. Bruna was found days later, hidden, alive. She helped in the process. She got protection. And she wrote me a letter saying, "You were the voice I couldn't be. Thank you." Elza was convicted of false testimony and complicity in the crime of concealing evidence. She died before serving her sentence, after a massive stroke at home. Rubens walked away. He said he needed to find redemption. He sent a farewell letter saying that, at last, he felt he had been useful to the truth. My mother? She's back to life. She started small, gardening, music lessons for underprivileged children. And every time she sees me, she says with tears in her eyes, "You didn't just save me from jail, you saved my story." And me? I became a prosecutor. And every case I take, I remember, there is always someone buried under papers, lies, and silence. And my job is to dig, even if it hurts, even if it bleeds, because only then can justice breathe. Comment: would you forgive someone who destroyed your family?